Hello, this is Hart Hagen in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm reporting about climate change, and I have kind of a contrarian view of climate change and what it's about. Yes, climate change is real, but the causes of climate change and what we ought to do about it are very different from what we're told. But let's get into this. I have an article from the Union of Concerned Scientists that I shared a little bit the other day, but it's a pretty good article as these things go. I have some criticisms of it, but compared with the New York Times, compared with the United Nations, it has quite a bit more good material in it. So let's look and see what this article has to say. This is talking about climate change impacts. And I'm going to go up to the top just real quick and show you what the article, the headline of the article. Union of Concerned Scientists reports in multimedia explainer, climate change and agriculture, a perfect storm in farm country. It was from March 20th, 2019, but not much has changed. So I think it's still current. I'm going to go down here to the part that I want you to see, how climate change will challenge farmers. Climate change trends, precipitation patterns are going to change, temperature patterns are going to change. Now, climate change impacts. One of my main themes in my reporting is that when we see reporting about climate change, we see, oh, here's flooding. Climate change is causing flooding is basically what we see. Yes, the temperatures are changing, and it makes some sense that changes in temperatures will cause more precipitation, but flooding is not a function of precipitation. Flooding is a function of runoff. You have flooding because you have too much runoff. It's possible to have a lot of precipitation, but not to have very much runoff because your soil is able to soak up the rain that does come. This is never, ever talked about. I read these things. I read the United Nations. I read the New York Times. I do Google searches for climate change. I do Google searches for climate change and flooding, climate change and drought. They're all about, here's flooding. This flooding is because of more precipitation, and it's because of climate change, and it's because of more carbon dioxide in the air caused by the burning of fossil fuels. They never say that maybe this flooding is a result of more runoff, and we're having more runoff because of bad soils, and we have bad soils because we're doing our farming and our landscaping in a way that is not good for the soil. So climate change impacts include flooding, drought. So we also have drought because of how we treat the soil. What we need to regard and implement is the 5 principles of soil health, which I get from Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown. The 5 principles of soil health are like, avoid tillage, avoid disturbance, avoid tillage, which is a way of disturbing the soil. Avoid chemical fertilizers, which are a way of disturbing the soil chemically. Avoid chemical herbicides, which are a way of disturbing the soil chemically. So avoid tillage, chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, because these are all ways of disturbing the soil. On the positive side, what you want to do is you want to have living roots in the ground. For one thing, you don't want to have bare soil. No bare soil. Bare soil is a no-no. If you want to cover up your soil either with something organic or with living plants. No bare soil ever. You don't see bare soil in nature, so you don't want to have bare soil because soil evolved in nature and we want to treat soil the way it kind of naturally evolved. So we want to have organic matter on top of the soil and or living plants in the ground. We also want to have not only living plants, but we want to have a diversity of living plants in the ground. And if possible, somehow incorporate animals. So I've just given you a whirlwind tour of the 5 principles of soil health. And what they never do is, I'm talking about major reporting. Whenever you see climate change, they never tell you that flooding could be caused by bad soil because bad soil causes runoff. So here they are, Union of Concerned Scientists, in an otherwise good and worthy article. They're just not going to get to the real causes of flooding or the real causes of drought. So they say, droughts. Too little water can be just as damaging as too much. Severe droughts have taken a heavy toll on crops, livestock, and farmers in many parts of the country, most notably California, the Great Plains, and the Midwest over the past decade. And science tells us that rising temperatures will likely make such droughts even worse. So they say science. The word science has all this gravitas in our culture. When science speaks, people listen. But sometimes they use the word science when it's not science, it's conjecture. And it's not science because we're not taking into account all the relevant facts and we're not being entirely rational. We're covering or trotting out peer-reviewed literature without relying on simple observation and logic and deduction. But it says, science tells us that rising temperatures will likely make such droughts even worse, depleting water supplies and in some cases spurring destructive wildfires. So it says, science tells us that rising temperatures will make droughts even worse. What they could say is that science and freaking common sense tells you that if you abuse the soil is less able to soak up rainfall, and that makes droughts even worse. They could say that, but they're not saying that, and they'll never say it, or they, in my observation, they're not saying it. They're strenuously avoiding the possibility of telling you that the way we treat the soils makes drought worse. So let's go down. Another thing they have, so what we're talking about here is the climate change impacts on farming. So climate change is going to create floods, climate change is going to create droughts, climate change is going to create changes in crop and livestock viability. Okay, so what they don't say is that bad soil creates changes in crop and livestock viability. But it says here, farmers choose crop varieties and animal breeds that are well suited to local conditions. As those conditions shift rapidly over the coming decades, many farmers will be forced to rethink some of their choices, which can mean making capital investments, finding new markets, and which can mean, that the farmers must make new capital investments, find new markets, and learn new practices. I don't have words to express how many important issues they're glossing over right here, right now, because, industrial agriculture, it imposes choices on farmers, choices that mean buying expensive fertilizers, buying expensive patented seeds, buying expensive herbicides. The practice of farming, the sector of farming is organized around how to make it big ag rich. If you're in big ag, you're the farming, if you're a stockholder in big agriculture corporations, then good for you, because farming, all these land resources, all the billions, countless billions, even trillions of dollars that cycle through the farm economy, all those dollars flow to the agribusiness corporations and not to the local farmer themselves. And so moving on. Another climate change impact, in addition to floods, droughts, and changes in crop and livestock viability, is new pests, pathogens, and weed problems. So when I see this, what I think of is, yeah, new pests, pathogens, and weed problems, but what are you doing about them? And actually, with this article, when we go down below, we're going to see we're going to see some of the causes of this. This article has many good observations to make. They just come short of making the connection between these farming methods and the problems that farming has, including climate change. So let's go on. First of all, let's look at this picture they have. Here's a picture of a field that looks like soybeans to me. You'll see, so what they're doing here is they're illustrating drought. They're illustrating how drought affects farmers. So you have cracked soil. That's obviously bad. You don't have to be a farmer to understand that this cracked soil means there hasn't been much rain, there is drought, and we are invited to believe that the reason for this drought is climate change, which means climate change caused by the burning of fossil fuels, which emits carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which causes warming and erratic weather patterns. We're invited to believe that this dry, cracked soil is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, and that we have to stop burning fossil fuels and stop emitting carbon dioxide. I'm all for greatly reducing the burning of fossil fuels, but the people who are wringing their hands about fossil fuels don't have a plan. And I'm all for lowering the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but the people who are griping, moaning, and complaining about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere don't have a plan for it. Furthermore, that is not the primary cause of this drought. We're seeing it's not the primary cause of the drought, and it's not the primary cause that this drought or this drought adversely impacts the farmer and the crop. So drought can mean less precipitation, but you can have below average precipitation and not have crop failure if your soil is able to hold water. This soil is not able to hold water. So this soil that you're looking at here causes both flooding and drought. This here that you're seeing represents a violation of all the principles of soil health. So let's go through the principles of soil health. Avoid disturbance such as tillage, avoid disturbance such as chemical fertilizers, avoid disturbance such as herbicides. This soil has been tilled, so that's a no-no. This farm, I'm assuming, is genetically modified soy, therefore it's Roundup ready, and therefore it is Roundup is an herbicide, so we're spraying chemical herbicides. Also, 100% chance that we have used chemical fertilizers on this soil. So right out of the gate, you're violating 3 of the principles of soil health. Avoid tillage, avoid chemical fertilizers, avoid herbicides. In addition, you want to have living roots. You want to have no bare ground. What do we see here? We see bare ground. You want to have living roots in the ground. Bare ground doesn't have living roots in the ground. And you want to have, in addition to no bare ground and living roots in the ground, you want to have a diversity. Is there diversity here? No, there's one crop here. There is no diversity here. And in addition to all this, you want to, if possible, incorporate animals into the system. There's a 99.99% chance that this land has not seen any animals for years. So all of the principles of soil health are being violated here. By principles of soil health, I'm talking about that which has been explained by Gabe Brown and Ray Archuleta. And so for one thing, we've violated all the principles of soil health. For another, and because we've violated all the principles of soil health, this land is susceptible to flooding and it's susceptible to drought. So this land might not be flooded. It depends on whether you're upstream or downstream. This is going to cause flooding downstream. This farm might not be a victim of the flooding, but this farm may be a cause of the flooding downstream. When it comes to drought, two questions. One is this farm causing drought? And is this farm a victim of drought? So I don't see any trees here, but more important, not every place needs trees. Not every place wants trees. Not every place can have trees. But if this is historically a forest, then you want to see some trees around. If it's historically a grassland, then you want to have diverse crops, grassland, yes, diverse crops, but diverse plant species here. And we're not seeing any of that. So, one question is whether this farm is a cause of drought. And it is, if it does not have diverse plant species, if it does not have any perennials, and if it does, and if the soil is not soaking up water. If the soil is not soaking up water, then this farm is partially a cause of the drought, because drought is caused partly when the soil is not able to soak up the rain that does come. Now, the other question is this farm a victim of drought? And the answer is yes. The reason it's a victim of drought is because this soil has been treated badly and the soil is not able to soak up water. If the soil is able to soak up rainfall, then this farm is not going to be a victim of drought to the same extent as it is now. This soil is not able to soak up rainfall. Because this soil is not able to soak up rainfall, it is not going to store the rainwater in the ground in between rain events. So this farm is going to be a victim of the drought. So we've gone through all the principles of soil health. We have speculated, if not determined, that this is the kind of farm that is violating all the principles of soil health as explained by Gabe Brown and Ray Archuleta. And we've also determined that this farm is in large measure a cause of drought. And also this farm is a victim of drought because you're not able to store any water in the soil. This farm is going to depend entirely on irrigation. Now, there's nothing wrong with irrigation, but you don't want to rely on irrigation at the expense of other means of watering the plants, such as watering them with the rainfall that soaks into the ground and gets stored in the ground. Let's go on to the next part of this. Now we're coming to it. Now we're coming to it. Industrial amplifiers. So industrial amplifiers means here are the things that here are the things that farming does to become more vulnerable to climate change. What they're not saying is that here is what farms are doing to cause climate change, to cause flooding, to cause drought, to cause the farmers to be vulnerable to weather events, and to cause the farms to be financially vulnerable. So there's all of this public policy that is causing farms to be vulnerable. Physically, they're vulnerable to the weather, they're vulnerable to the climate, they're vulnerable to flooding, they're vulnerable to drought. And I don't blame farmers for this. I honestly don't blame farmers for it. If you're a farmer and you're listening to this, who's this guy who's criticizing farmers? I'm not criticizing farmers. I am criticizing public policy, but much of this change is going to have to occur even if public policy never changes. So what I want you to do, if you're a farmer, I want you to get Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil. I want you to look up Dirt to Soil online. I want you to look up Gabe Brown on YouTube. And what else? I want you to look up Ray Archuleta on YouTube, Archuleta. Ray Archuleta. Learn about the principles of soil health. Learn that there's a different way to farm. But that different way is not what we're seeing here. So let's go through these industrial amplifiers and see what agribusiness is doing to cause all of this to occur. So Union of Concerned Scientists, they get so close to understanding the problem. In fact, they are explaining much of the problem right here, right now. What they miss is that these industrial amplifiers are not just making farms and farmers more vulnerable to climate change, but they are in fact causing climate change. And so there's what causes climate change, and then there's what to do about it. I think those are the same thing, addressing the causes and then becoming less vulnerable. Those are the same thing. In the prevailing model, in the prevailing narrative, it's like there's the causes of climate change over here, and we need to stop the causes, and then we need to become less vulnerable. But to me, that's all one and the same thing. So let's look at this. Degraded industrial amplifiers, degraded soils. Typical monoculture cropping system. So monoculture means one crop. Mono means one. Monoculture means one crop at a time. So that picture of soybeans that we saw before, it's one crop. You can have monoculture of soy, monoculture of corn, monoculture of wheat. It's one crop. So it says typical monoculture cropping systems leave soil bare for much of the year, rely on synthetic fertilizer, and plow fields regularly. So there we go. Three, I would say right here, we're violating three principles of soil health. A monoculture means means there's no diversity. Diversity is the opposite of monoculture. So a monoculture cropping system is not going to have diversity. It says it leaves soil bare. So bare soil is a no-no in the five, or the way I explain the principles of soil health, I break them up into 7 or 8 different things. But one principle of soil health is to no bare soil. What Gabe Brown says is armor the soil. And Gabe Brown is in North Dakota, the Burleigh County U.S. Office Extension Office of the USDA. They like to say armor the soil. So armoring the soil means at least a layer of organic matter, whether it's crop clippings, whether it's mulch. In my home landscape, I use wood chips, but armor the soil so that there's no bare soil. You want to have either organic matter or living plants on the soil, between the soil and the sun, because the sun shines down and those ultraviolet rays are going to kill the top layer of biology in the soil, and you don't want to kill the top layer of biology in the soil. Furthermore, if you have bare soil, that soil is going to dry out and become compacted. Compacted soil cannot absorb the rainfall. If the soil is compacted and you're not absorbing the rainfall, then that causes flooding, because flooding is not a function of rainfall, it's a function of runoff. If you have compacted soil because the soil has been left bare, you're going to have more runoff and therefore more flooding. Furthermore, if that rainfall does not soak into the soil, then your soil is not going to be able to hold on to that rainfall in between rain events. You're going to have a lot more water available to the plants if that water is, if the rainfall soaks into the ground and that soil is able to hold on to the rainfall in between rain events. That's how your plants grow. That's how you reduce your irrigation costs. When farmers reduce their irrigation costs, they're also reducing the usage of fossil fuels, because the irrigation systems typically run on diesel fuel. So it says, typical monoculture cropping systems leave soil bare for much of the year, rely on synthetic fertilizer. So synthetic fertilizer is another no-no. Gabe Brown and Ray Archuleta will tell you that synthetic fertilizer is a no-no in terms of soil health. Also, Matt Powers and Elaine Ingham are soil experts who will tell you that synthetic fertilizer is a no-no. Also, David Johnson of the he's a microbiologist, which includes a soil biologist at the University of New Mexico and University of California at, I think, Chico State. All these people that are in touch with how to do good soil will tell you that synthetic fertilizer is a no-no, and yet synthetic fertilizer by far is the norm in farming. So rely on synthetic fertilizer and plow fields regularly. So in one sentence, they're identifying 4 violations of the principles of soil health. Typical monoculture cropping systems, monoculture is a lack of diversity, leave the soil bare. Bare soil is a no-no. You want to armor the soil. You want to put some organic matter or plants on the soil. Also, bare soil means you don't have any plants in the soil. Because if you had plants, at least, after the plants grow up a little bit, they're covering the soil, so the soil is not bare. You rely on synthetic fertilizer and plow fields regularly. So right in one sentence, you're talking about 5 or 6 violations of the principles of soil health. Reading on. These practices leave soils low in organic matter and prevent formation of deep, complex root systems. There we go. Now we're talking. Here's more information, or at least clues, as to what's good for soil and what's bad for soil. It says these practices leave soils low in organic matter. So organic matter is almost the gold standard for, it's the test. How much organic matter do you have in your soil is a test for for whether the soil is in good shape or not. So good soil is about bad soil is about less than 1 or 2% soil organic matter. Good soil is north of 5%, maybe even 7 or 8 or 9% soil organic matter. You want high organic matter, because without organic matter, soil is just a clump of minerals. What minerals am I talking about? Sand, silt, and clay are the three main mineral components of soil, depending on where you are. And the sand, silt, and clay, if it's only sand, silt, and clay and no organic matter, then that soil is going to be compacted. Soil that is compacted cannot absorb rainfall, therefore it's going to cause both flooding and drought. So it says these practices leave soils low in organic matter and prevent formation of deep, complex root systems. There's another kind of gold standard in terms of what's good for the soil is deep, complex root systems. So how do you get deep, complex root systems? Well, it's not from monocultures. It's not from having only soy or only corn with bare ground in between, which is the norm in industrial farming. One crop with bare ground in between. These practices leave soils low in organic matter and prevent the formation of deep, complex root systems. So if you do have deep, complex root systems, what good does that do you? Well, if you have the soil that is just infused with roots, then what you have is this plant what do plants do? Whether it's trees, smaller plants, bushes, shrubs, grasses, what do plants do? Plants take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Through photosynthesis, they turn that carbon dioxide into sugars, and they take upwards of 1/3 of those sugars and put those into the ground. They're called root exudates. Exudate is a form of the word exude. Exude means the sugars that the plant manufactured then get exuded out of the roots, and those sugars are like cake and cookies to the soil biology. Bacteria and fungi and nematodes come running because, especially the bacteria first, the bacteria come and eat the sugars, the fungi come and eat the bacteria, then you have nematodes and protozoa. Protozoa include your amoeba and your flagellates and your ciliates. So the protozoa are about 1,000 times bigger than the bacteria. The bacteria are the smallest. The protozoa are kind of like the size of a basketball compared to a golf ball. If the bacteria is the size of a golf ball, then the protozoa are about the size of a basketball. That's about the proportion of the relative size. And this soil food web is this whole big thing. The soil food web is this whole big thing. It was little understood until recent years. But if you're going to have a thriving farm with good soil that is able to water the plants without excessive irrigation, if you're going to have good soil that is able to absorb the rainfall and therefore prevent flooding and drought, then you want to have healthy soil biology, because it takes good soil biology to create the soil structure. Soil structure means the soil has pore spaces in it. Pore spaces means like air spaces. They're spaces that hold air until it rains, and then they hold a lot of water. So these pore spaces always hold some combination of air and water. You want those pore spaces in your soil. That is why we practice the principles of soil health, because we want the soil to have pore spaces so that when it rains, the rain soaks into the soil. When the rain soaks into the soil, then it tends to feed or water the soil biology. So the soil biology thrives on this rainfall, but the rainfall can only reach the soil biology if you have those pore spaces. Where do those pore spaces come from? Well, those pore spaces come from the soil biology. So it's a virtuous cycle. The soil biology creates the pore spaces. The pore spaces soak up the rain. The rain feeds the soil biology. It's this whole big thing. It has been very little understood until recent years, and it is posing a major challenge to the industrial model of farming. So what we want to do is we want to practice the principles of soil health. We want to do this in our home landscapes. If you're not a farmer, please practice the principles of soil health in your own home landscape so that you will understand how soil works, so that insofar as you, a citizen, have influence over public policy, you can have a positive influence because you understand the principles of soil health, so that when you drive by a field or see a field on YouTube or on television, you see pictures of it on the internet, if you see that crop field, if you see a tractor going across a field, the tractor is plowing the field, you're going, ah, ah, the tractor is plowing the field. That's a violation of the principles of soil health. We need to reach that farmer and talk to them. We need to get that farmer to seek out Gabe Brown, Ray Archuleta, Elaine Ingham, Matt Powers, David Johnson. We need for them to understand the principles of soil health. And if that farmer can start to understand the principles of soil health, then they're not going to change everything overnight, but they're going to start moving in the right direction. They're going to start saying, wow, maybe I don't need to spend all this money on plowing. Maybe I don't need to spend all this money on chemical fertilizers. Maybe I don't need to spend all this money on herbicides. Maybe I don't need to spend all this money on patented seeds. Maybe it's a travesty for me to have all of this bare soil so that the sun is shining on the soil, killing the soil biology, and drying out the soil so that I have to pay more for irrigation. Maybe this bare soil is causing flooding downstream from me. Maybe this bare soil is causing drought on my farm because this bare soil, this bad soil, is not able to soak up the rainfall. Maybe this farmer can start to understand that drought is not low precipitation. Did you catch that? Drought is not low precipitation. Drought is not a lack of rainfall. Drought is when the rain, when it did rain, it did not soak into the ground, and therefore there's no water stored in the soil for the plants to use. Flooding and drought are flip sides of the same coin. Repeat, flooding and drought are flip sides of the same coin. Flooding it makes it seem like too much water. Drought is not enough water, but both are caused because the rainfall did not soak into the ground. When it rains, you have bad soil that is not able to absorb the rainfall. Therefore, it runs off and creates a flood. When it ran off, it when it runs off, it's like, hey, this water is running off. This water is running away. Run away, run away, because there's no place to soak in here. What we could have is that rainfall soaking into the ground so that it is stored in the ground, because when the rainfall is stored in the ground, that's when the plants can use it. Not that you shouldn't ever irrigate. There's a strategic way to irrigate, but you don't want to spend money and fossil fuels on irrigation when you could have captured the rainfall. This is the whole concept of rain-fed agriculture. Some places in the world have no choice but to capture the rain that does fall. But we need more rain-fed agriculture, and we need less dependence on rain gauges and reservoirs. We have less dependence on reservoirs like Lake Mead out west. Lake Mead is going down, 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 down. Well, maybe Lake Mead is going down, 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 down because there's not a steady enough flow of water from the basin that feeds Lake Mead. And maybe there's not a steady enough flow of water from the basin that feeds Lake Mead because there is not enough good soil in the basin that feeds Lake Mead. And there's not enough good soil in the basin that feeds Lake Mead because we're not practicing the principles of soil health. If I could change one thing worldwide that would be absolutely fantastic for human health, for food security, for water security, and for wildlife, I would change how we treat the soil, because there's so much that could emerge from that. If we treated the soil well, we could reduce flooding by 90%. I'm pulling 90% out of the air, but I don't think it's an exaggeration. When you have Gabe Brown's farm that can get a foot of rain in less than a day. In 2009, Gabe Brown's farm got a foot of rain in less than a day. Most of that foot of rain came in a 6-hour time period. So a foot of rain, almost a foot of rain in less than 6 hours. It falls on Gabe Brown's farm, and there's no flooding because he had been practicing the principles of soil health, and all of that rain soaks into the farm. Therefore, there's no flooding. And also, if that rain soaks into the soil, it means that water is going to be there to feed the plants. This could be happening worldwide. The only thing keeping this from happening worldwide is that we're not practicing the principles of soil health. It's easy enough. Let's run through them real quick once again. Avoid tillage, avoid chemical fertilizers, avoid herbicides, avoid bare ground. Keep the ground covered with something, either organic matter or plants. And you want to have living roots in the ground at all times, whenever possible. Even if the plant is not going to grow to maturity, it does a lot of good if it can just be there in the ground. You want living roots in the ground at all times. Furthermore, you want a diversity of living roots in the ground at all times. So diversity is good because every plant feeds a different aspect of the soil biology. So you want the soil biology. Soil biology is the very definition of healthy soil, if the soil has a lot of biology in it, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, if the soil has a lot of biology in it, then that biology is going to make good soil. So you want to avoid tillage. Where was I? Avoid tillage, avoid chemical fertilizers, avoid herbicides, avoid bare soil. Keep the soil covered with something, either organic matter or living plants. Keep living roots in the ground at all times, and keep a diversity of living roots in the ground at all times. If you can have multiple plants, multiple species of plants, preferably multiple plant families. So, legume is likely going to be in a different family from something else. And also Gabe uses 5 principles of soil health, now 6. I use 7 just because I divided up a little bit differently for purposes of talking about it. But the last thing is that if possible, incorporate animals into incorporate animals. If you can have grazing animals to graze, this might be a crop field. It's called I forget what it's called, but it's pasture cropping or something like that. But if you can have animals graze on this, then hey, back in the old days, they knew that grazing animals poop and pee, and that's good for fertilizer. So if possible, incorporate animals into the environment. So if you practice all these principles of soil health, it will be a different world. And this is almost never, ever talked about when they're talking about climate change. We could speculate as to why, but it's never, ever talked about. So if somebody lies to you about one thing, they're going to lie to you about other things. Or if they're ignorant, if they're kind of lying by an omission, maybe they're not intentionally altering the truth, but sometimes the person is not lying to you, but the institution that he or she is part of, they're lying to you. So anyway, that's about all. Let's practice. If we would practice the principles of soil health, that would make a much bigger difference for climate change than anything we could do. That's the one thing I would change if I could, that would change our climate. So this is Hart Hagen signing off for today. This has been March 18th, 2024. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful day.